Pelicans assistant coach James Borrego is rumored for another head coaching job, and I'll tell you why the Pelicans need to do everything they can to keep him and avoid repeating a previous mistake they made with Chris Finch. It's the Friday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcast and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Friday, we're going to look at kind of like staff stuff around the Pelicans. James Borrego rumored to the Cleveland Cavaliers after they fired their head coach. The Pelicans need to keep him, if just anything, to not repeat a previous mistake they made with Chris Finch. I'll explain in today's show. Yes, we will also talk about Jana Austin as well, and that move there and why I don't really think it impacts too much, and I'll explain. It's coming up in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans, and of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team, so please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, which helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So let's get into the biggest news, I think, around the team right now. And that is James Borrego, who is already linked to and interviewed for, it sounds like, the Los Angeles Lakers head coaching job, is now linked to the Cleveland Cavaliers and their open head coaching job after they fired JB Bickerstaff yesterday. I think this is kind of big. And let me ask you this. I'm going to ask you a question. What does Borrego interviewing for two playoff teams, their head coaching job, say about him as a head coach? That seems good, right? That Lakers job is very high profile. The Cavaliers have a good team. They were fourth in the East, and they're all interested in interviewing him and maybe having him be their next head coach. That says he's a good coach, right? That says he is a good coach. Just based off of that, letting him leave or having him leave would be a negative thing. That Lakers job, I don't know if it's actually that good of a job. The Cavaliers, you might be trading away Donovan Mitchell, though this move was reportedly made to keep Donovan Mitchell happy and have him sign an extension. But keeping a guy that's thought of very highly around the league in Borrego would be a really smart thing here. When you look at head coach Willie Green, who has a lot of flaws, not entirely bad, but has a lot of flaws, having strong assistants around him is an important thing. One of the things you hear with the Lakers and JJ Redick is they need to hire good assistants around him to help him. Same thing for head coach Willie Green, who's still, growing and learning on the job. So having good assistants, offensive assistants in James Borrego around him, I think is a really important thing. That might not stop Borrego from taking a head coaching job, though. But I will say this, if you can throw more money at Borrego, keep him here as the lead assistant, which is his role here, I think that's a smart thing. If just to avoid a situation that happened in the past. And that's with Chris Finch, who was an assistant on Alvin Gentry's coaching staff. And Chris Finch is now the head coach of the Timberwolves, team that's really, really good. He's kind of like half coaching right now because he got hurt, but he's there and he's done a very good job with the Minnesota Timberwolves. And that's something that the Pelicans messed up previously. If you go back to the 2019-2020 season, Zion's first year in the league, and the shutdown with COVID and everything, we also heard a lot of rumors during the season that they weren't happy with head coach Alvin Gentry. And a lot has been reported on it, particularly by Christian Clark of NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune, and we'll touch on something he wrote later in the show, about that David Griffin wasn't happy. And David Griffin kind of had to inherit Alvin Gentry because Gail Benson wanted to keep him. And then when he could probably justify firing him, he wanted to fire him and bring in Ty Lue, who was out of a job, who he worked with in Cleveland, won a title there. But Lue didn't want to come here, so they kept Alvin Gentry. But clearly they weren't convinced by Alvin Gentry that season. One thing the Pelicans did not do, and I even talked about this. If you're an everydayer, like a long time everydayer, I talked about this back then when Chris Finch got that Minnesota Timberwolves job and left, right? The writing was on the wall that he was going to leave after that season, because if they didn't like Alvin Gentry and Chris Finch had been a rumored head coaching candidate for other positions, why not fire Gentry and elevate Chris Finch to an interim and give him a trial run? And they never did that, which tells you what they thought about Chris Finch as a head coach. And looking back on that now, that is entirely an incorrect thing. You then hired Stan Van Gundy. That was a disaster, fired him after 1 year. And then you brought in Willie Green, whose first year was good and has been, a rocky, not rocky, but a bit of an up and down and mixed bag tenure here. I don't think he's one of the worst 5 coaches in the league, though. But you didn't think that highly of Chris Finch, and you just let him go. And now look at what he's doing. And oh boy, could you have used that on this team, at least in the meantime. Who knows if Chris Finch would have ended up like he did, right? But you would have avoided that Stan Van Gundy year potentially, and that set New Orleans back a little bit. You can't avoid that same type of thing here with James Borrego. This is someone they brought in who's thought of very highly around the league. If you like him, if you think his offensive philosophy is smart and what you want to put in, and they're hoping to put in a new offense next year after abandoning his because of the way Brandon Ingram played. But if you trade Brandon Ingram, you can do that. Don't let that guy go then. If Willie Green goes in on somewhat of a hot seat, and I don't think it's scalding or anything like that, but I think it's definitely a little bit warm, that there's got to be some changes from him and some growth from him. If that's the case, keep Borrego here so that if you do decide to make a mid-season decision and fire Willie Green, you have James Borrego ready to go. Whether that's to be your interim head coach or long-term head coach is unclear, and you don't need to decide that right now, but you at least have someone who can take over. And I think that's important. Don't make the same mistake they made with Chris Finch. I'm not saying you should fire Willie Green. I'm not saying Willie Green can grow or can't grow or anything like that. But have it as insurance if you can. Pay him more if you need to. That, I think, is worth really keeping an eye on. And if the Pelicans make the playoffs again, Borrego's still going to be rumored for other jobs and linked to other jobs. But this is a guy they should absolutely be trying to keep. And then here's the kicker. When it comes to the Cleveland Cavaliers, if he goes there, does that rule them out or complicate a Brandon Ingram trade? Based on how this season went, it definitely might. Let's talk about that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. Don't stretch your staff thin by having them cover multiple roles. You're losing money if you're doing that. You're stressing them out. Maybe you're going to be hiring for more positions then. Just get the right people in quick. LinkedIn Jobs isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else, and LinkedIn does all of that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates, so easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and don't have the time to hire or the resources to hire, so they provide all of that for you. And that's why 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube. We'll go back to doing the live shows next week too here and do a bonus one to thank y'all for all of the subscriptions to the YouTube channel as well. For your second listen, New Saints offense, things are looking good, pointing in the right direction. Ross Jackson breaking down everything black and gold over at the Locked On Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Go see Ross Jackson next for your second listen. And become an everydayer. I don't know if I said that in the beginning. That means you listen to Locked On Pelicans, Locked On Saints Monday through Friday. It's an exclusive club of people who only listen Monday through Friday. Become an everydayer. If you are, let me know in the comments down below. I love seeing all the comments that go, every day you're here. When people come up to me at the arena and around the city, it's pretty awesome. So I love that. So let me know if you're an everydayer. Let's go back to James Borrego, potentially going to the Cleveland Cavaliers. This is where things get real interesting. Say they hire him. That's a loss, right? Like, this is someone that could replace Willie Green. They need that kind of experience on the bench. More on that actually in the next segment too, a little bit. And I think, just losing smart basketball people, good basketball people is not what you want to do. So try and avoid that. But also if he goes to the Cavaliers, and I literally did a show on this yesterday and the everydayers know that. Does that rule them out as a potential trade partner for Brandon Ingram? Ingram going there makes a lot of sense. They need size and scoring on the wing. They absolutely need that. They just don't have it. And in the East, where you've got Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, right? Some of these other players out there, you need wing scoring. You need that type of position. They don't have it. And that's the type of thing that's going to hold them back, I think, long term. But if Borrego goes there after the weird year that we had here with maybe him and Ingram not really being the best fit, he's not going to want to trade for Brandon Ingram. Now, he's not the front office. That's Kobe Altman, who is in charge of all of that. But if he has a say in it or gives them the intel that you wouldn't get elsewhere about kind of what went on behind the scenes here, that probably takes them out of the running. That means no Donovan Mitchell, no Darius Garland, no Jared Allen, no Evan Mobley, right? They're going to trade one or two of those players away this offseason. But you're hoping that you do that and trade Brandon Ingram. Well, if they don't want Brandon Ingram, Jared Allen, who seems like a great fit here for the Pelicans, how do you make that deal happen? How do you make that deal happen then? I don't know if they really actually want CJ McCollum, but I don't know if you get a deal done. And then all of a sudden, that kind of kills you in other trades. We've heard Jake Fisher of Yahoo say Brandon Ingram maybe has a really wide market. You've got the 76ers, who I think are also going to be very interested in him as well. And having more teams that want him means you can drive up the price, right? This is leverage. This is negotiations. Having a team that makes sense for him out of the running because of who their head coach is, that's not great. And look, Ingram should have loved what they were doing here. Didn't, though. When I talked to him on media day before the season started, right before training camp started, I asked him if he had talked to Borrego about what they wanted to do. And Ingram was like, yeah, he's going to put the ball in my hands. He was excited about it. They abandoned Borrego's offense after like 2 months because BI didn't want to do it. If Borrego's got ideas of how the offense should be and how he's going to coach, right? You as a front office person, even if you want Brandon Ingram, need to, at that point, think of your head coach and make sure you give him players that are going to work. Now, there's also a flip side to this, that if Borrego doesn't get that job, maybe it does really help trading him there because then they remain an option. And this also could be conjecture. Maybe Borrego has a better idea of how to use Ingram or wants him, right? Like we're kind of trying to read between the lines here. We're going to do that a little bit. I'm going to say in the next segment, like we shouldn't be doing that. And so I think when you look at this situation can kind of go either way, but there's still a lot of unknowns. But it does feel like if this team is very kind of intent on trying to trade Brandon Ingram because they don't see the fit here, that was also assuming that Borrego was going to be here next year. And who knows that, if you traded Brandon Ingram this past offseason and brought in someone else, if you could have run that Borrego offense that they wanted. Now, they finished 11th in offense, but I don't think it was a particularly good 11th when it comes to that. So you've got to keep that in mind. You really need to get a maximum return on Brandon Ingram. I don't like, when we talked about the Orlando Magic and what a trade would look like there, I wasn't excited about that. Y'all in the comments weren't excited about that either, right? And so you don't want to trade Brandon Ingram for pure depth, right? You want to trade him for a difference maker. Acquire a difference maker and really shake it up. One of the worst things, I don't think it's the worst thing, because I do think there's a possibility that Brandon Ingram returns. Ideally on an extension, you would imagine. So I think when you also look at it, if it takes the Cavaliers out and you can't get a deal done because you've lost some negotiating leverage with the Atlanta Hawks, with the Detroit Pistons, Magic, 76ers, and who knows if actually all of those teams are interested. I don't think the Magic truly are. I'm starting to kind of not know if Detroit really wants to do it either, although I think they could. You might end up with Brandon Ingram back here. That could then be okay if Borrego isn't, if those two were like oil and water and just didn't mix. Maybe that does open things up to find another mind to bring them in, to have them kind of figure out the offense where everyone can kind of coexist and you get the right fit between Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson. And to Ingram's credit, his comments at the end of season media availability do seem to indicate that he knows that a lot of this is on him. I don't think he's looking around kind of like blaming other people a ton. A little bit, yeah, but maybe not a ton. And I think he's going to do some introspection this offseason. But I want as many trade partners that you could potentially get for Brandon Ingram because I want to get the most return for him. This team has to think like that. Some of the picks are dwindling a little bit. You don't have the same kind of war chest of assets and all of that, though they're still in good position with a lot of that compared to other teams. Especially if you kick that Lakers pick back a year. But you've got to make the most of what you have and the assets that you have. And that involves Brandon Ingram, and more teams that want him, the better when it comes to something like that. So for a variety of reasons, I want to keep Borrego here in New Orleans and think he can do some really, really good things. I was, if you're an everyday and you remember, I was a little bit skeptical about him coming in and what he could do. And I think there's still reasons to be skeptical about him. But when, everyone wants him, I think that says something, right? Like that says something when basketball teams, other teams want your guy, says something about him and what he's capable of doing or how, the regard that you think or just his basketball acumen in total. I want to keep that guy. Just because I don't have full 100% faith in head coach Willie Green. Keep smart assistants on the staff to really kind of do their job and help things. The defense has been very, very good based off of what they've done this year with the coaching, the past couple of years. And that has to do with assistant coaches and, Jaron Collins kind of running all of that. Keep smart assistants and let them do their job well. And I think that goes really, really far. I'd like to keep that. And then if you have to move on from head coach Willie Green, you've got Borrego right there. And if you can get a killer offense, man, it would be so much fun to watch. And I think this team could go pretty far then. We'll see, though. None of this matters, though, if Zion Williamson isn't playing. Right? Like that's the biggest thing here. And that's going to tie into what we're going to talk about here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Jana Austin being let go by the team as reported by Christian Clark of NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune. Is that a big deal? I don't think it is. I don't think this matters almost at all. And we've got some precedent to kind of explain why. And it gets into kind of team building philosophy. And there's a lesson to be learned from game one of the Dallas Mavericks and Minnesota Timberwolves Western Conference Finals. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Right now, though, I'm excited to tell you about eBay Motors. I work on all of my cars, and they're all running right now, or at least the old one is, because of eBay Motors. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Whether it's old, whether it's new, they're going to have all the parts that you want or need to keep it running or make it go faster, sound louder, look cooler. LED headlights, roof racks, exhaust kits, superchargers, whatever it is, speed, power, style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your vehicle, you're always going to find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home a huge win. So keep your vehicle running over at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Become an everydayer. That means you listen to Locked On Pelicans Monday through Friday. So let's start to wrap up the show. And this was the news that dropped from Christian Clark, beat writer for NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune, saying that the Pelicans were parting ways with Jana Adams, an assistant athletic trainer who had worked very closely with Zion Williamson. And immediately, everyone was tweeting like, is this a bad thing? What's going on here? Why are they doing this? I don't have any more insight into this right now than what Christian said. And I'm not overly worried about it. I don't think this is like a big thing at all, because we've been here before, right? Let's go back a year. The Pelicans parted ways with assistant coach Teresa Witherspoon, who worked very closely with Zion Williamson. Zion Williamson, during that year, he missed the entire season, talked about how she really helped him through a lot of like the personal stuff and was there for him. They were very, very close. They got rid of her. They fired her, right? And everything was fine. Everything was fine. It didn't upset him. It didn't have him require a trade. If anything, he was more bought in than he had ever been before. And while he was healthy this year, and Jana Austin definitely played a factor into that, if they feel that you can upgrade from that, that's the way to go. You know, the thing with Teresa Witherspoon that I've been told from inside the organization was like, they just didn't think that highly of her as a coach, right? Like they didn't think she was that good of a coach. So they wanted to get someone else who was a better coach. Kind of simple as that. To them, it's about getting the best people in the building, not people that are, you know, friends with others or close with others, right? And I think one of the more important things is not who they put in the building, but it's more about who Zion puts around himself. On the Gilbert Arenas podcast during Summer League last year, he talked about that he was surrounding himself with, I think his word was wisdom. Didn't want to call them older people because they'd be offended. He said wisdom. He started to put the right people around him, and that helped him get to where he needed to be. It wasn't necessarily what the Pelicans were doing, but the work that he was doing and his, camp, right? All of that. And that's what seemed to get him moving forward. That's the more important thing than kind of like peripheral people on the training staff or the coaching staff. It's more about Zion, right? Ultimately, that's what this is about. That's ultimately what this is. I can make this job so easy at times. I joked about it on Locked On NBA the other day when I did it on Thursday this week instead of Wednesday. It's about your best players playing and playing well. Look at game one between the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Dallas Mavericks. The Dallas got 64 combined points between Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, right? And for the Minnesota Timberwolves, Anthony Edwards did not have a good game, like at all. And if he doesn't have a good game, they're going to lose. And it's really as simple as that. You have to just have your best players available and playing well. Simple. It's that simple. All the other stuff, we can talk about the end of the roster, 10th, 9th, 12th men. It doesn't matter if Zion's not playing. We can talk about coaching. It doesn't matter if Zion's not playing. Those things can give you a slight edge, but they're not the difference makers, right? If Zion's putting the right people around him and that makes him available in the best version of himself, who cares who's on the Pelican staff? It's all about that, right? That's just the team building. I learned that lesson early on in my career here of like, don't overthink the little things. My career being, as a broadcaster, writer, all of that stuff. We can analyze all of that and that can be fun and great. Don't get me wrong, but it's really about your main players. They are going to be the ones that take you far or not, right? Go back a couple of years to the Miami Heat making the finals with Jimmy Butler in the bubble, just carrying a team that had no business being there. It's about him doing that, right? When he doesn't play, they lose to the Celtics in the first round. Does that mean Spoelstra is a bad coach all of a sudden? No, it's just he didn't have his best players available, right? That's what it comes down to with most of this. Same for the Pelicans and Zion Williamson. Borrego is important, yeah. But with this team, with Zion healthy for the most part of the year, they were good. They were good. 49 wins is not a joke. When you look at this franchise and the history of this franchise, this ranks as the third most wins they've ever had. Right? That's what it was? No, tied for the second most wins that they've ever had. Tied for the second most wins that they've ever had. That tells you something. That tells you a lot, right? It's about your main players. Teresa Witherspoon not being on the team did not tank the season at all. Didn't really impact anything. We probably forgot about it most of the, at the beginning of the year when they started winning games. That's going to be the case going forward. All of these things around the edges pale in comparison to the best players being available and playing to their ability. Timberwolves won games if Anthony Edwards is scoring 19 points on 16 shots and not getting into the paint at all. That's what happened in game 1. And the Mavs are going to win if Luka Doncic just torches that drop coverage that the Minnesota Timberwolves ran against him. If he doesn't and that worked, we'd be having a different conversation here. It comes down to that. You can get edges in other little areas, but it's about your main players playing well or not playing well and being available or not being available. That series against the Oklahoma City Thunder could have looked different if Brandon Ingram just had good games, played better, right? Made his shots. If the Pelicans had just made open 3-pointers, that could have looked entirely different. They were unable to do that. We don't need to overthink some of this stuff because I think that definitely happens here. Or we just want to kind of just get upset or something. But ultimately, I think this is much ado about nothing here. So we'll see what happens. But I don't think Zion's going to, he might not like it, but he'll get over it. It'll be fine. And everything will be good going into next season as long as he's healthy. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, this week of Locked On Pelicans. Appreciate y'all listening. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. And I'll be back with y'all on Monday. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.